Every night, without fail, she heard it, a soft, deliberate knocking that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, echoing through the hallways of her lonely apartment and through the corridors of her mind, as if the walls themselves were trying to whisper secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. At first, she tried to ignore it, blaming the wind, the creaking floors, or her imagination, telling herself that old buildings have noises, that maybe she was just tired or stressed. But the knocking never stopped. It was patient, persistent, and haunting in a way that made sleep impossible, made her heart race in anticipation and dread, until one night, after weeks of sleepless nights and trembling hands, she could no longer resist the compulsion to know, to confront the mystery that had invaded her life. And so, with a deep breath that trembled in her chest and hands that shook like leaves in a storm, she approached the door, whispering into the silence, "Who's there?" And instead of words, the knocking responded, slower this time, almost as if it had been waiting for her courage, a rhythm that seemed almost intentional, almost like a message. And then she noticed it. A small envelope slipped just beneath the door, perfectly timed with the final knock, its paper worn and edges yellowed. And inside, an old photograph stared back at her, faded but unmistakable, of a little girl standing right on this doorstep, smiling with a face eerily familiar yet unnervingly strange, stirring memories she didn't know she had, memories of forgotten laughter, hidden corners of the apartment she had long dismissed, of shadows and whispers from a past she thought was gone. And then the realization hit her like lightning. The knocking wasn't random. It wasn't a ghost or a stranger. It was someone she had lost, someone she had always carried in the deepest parts of her heart without knowing, someone who had been reaching out, patiently, night after night, through symbols, through subtle notes left under the door, through objects she recognized from a childhood she barely remembered, guiding her step by step to uncover a truth she had buried. And as she pieced the clues together, fear slowly transformed into a strange, consuming curiosity, a need to understand, to reconnect, until the final night came when the knocking sounded louder, insistent, resonating with something primal in her soul. And she opened the door, not to a shadow, not to a stranger, but to someone she had always known, someone who had never stopped waiting, someone whose presence finally made all the sleepless nights, all the trembling, all the anxiety worth it. And in that single heart-stopping moment, the apartment, the night, the knocking, all of it made sense. For what she had feared was never meant to harm her, but to awaken her, to guide her back to a truth and a connection she had almost forgotten, to remind her that even in the loneliest nights, someone somewhere had been reaching out, knocking patiently until she was ready to listen. And when she finally embraced that truth, fear dissolved into relief. Dread turned into love, and the haunting rhythm of the knocking became a comforting heartbeat, a proof that some mysteries, no matter how terrifying at first, are meant to lead us home. After that night, when the door finally opened to reveal the figure she had been unknowingly waiting for, she expected answers, clear, simple explanations, but instead, she found herself staring into eyes that carried decades of silence, of memories that neither time nor distance could erase. The knocking had been only the beginning, a signal, a thread leading her into a web of secrets she hadn't realized existed. Every room she walked into now felt alive with whispers of the past. The familiar apartment suddenly seemed like a museum of forgotten moments, each object, each creaking floorboard, a fragment of stories waiting to be remembered. She picked up the photograph again, tracing the little girl's face with trembling fingers, realizing that the smile she had once found comforting now held layers of unspoken emotion, fear, longing, and a silent plea for recognition. Questions tumbled in her mind faster than she could grasp. Why now, after all these years? Why had the knocking begun only recently, after decades of silence? And most importantly, who had orchestrated this entire sequence of events? Days turned into nights as she tried to piece together the fragments she had been given. Each night brought new signs, sometimes a faint whisper outside her window, other times a shadow that flickered across the hallway in the corner of her eye. Every clue seemed carefully placed, not to frighten her but to lead her closer to understanding. She started keeping a journal, jotting down every sound, every movement, every subtle hint. Slowly, patterns began to emerge, revealing not just the presence of someone close, but a mind deliberately crafting a path for her to follow. Fear was still there, yes, but now it was accompanied by a strange, magnetic pull, an irresistible need to follow the trail to its end. One particularly quiet night, as rain pelted the windows and the city outside seemed to vanish into gray shadows, she heard the knocking again, soft, insistent, almost urgent. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She opened the door immediately, and in the dim hallway, she found a small box wrapped in warm brown paper. Her hand shook as she opened it, revealing items she recognized instantly. A tiny music box she had treasured as a child, a locket that had vanished from her dresser years ago, and a bundle of letters written in a handwriting she had only ever seen on old photographs. Each item was a piece of a puzzle, each one carrying whispers of a story that she had buried deep within herself. As she examined the letters, she realized they weren't just letters. They were confessions, explanations, apologies for long-forgotten events, and instructions that slowly began to unravel the reason behind the mysterious knocking. It became clear that someone had been trying to communicate, to guide her, to reconnect her with a part of her life she thought was lost forever. Every night, the knocking had been a reminder, a bridge between her present and a past she had no memory of fully, a past filled with love, mistakes, and promises waiting to be fulfilled. The more she uncovered, the more she understood that the mystery wasn't just about who was knocking. It was about why, and why it mattered more than she could have ever imagined. And as the nights wore on, the fear that had once gripped her began to transform into a quiet anticipation, a readiness to confront truths she had avoided, to face the reality that some secrets, no matter how hidden, have a way of finding us when the time is right. In the end, the knocking was no longer something to dread. It had become a guide, a reminder, and a connection she had almost lost. And she understood deep in her heart that the nights of fear had been preparing her, shaping her, and leading her to a revelation that would change the way she understood herself and the people who had been quietly waiting for her all along. The nights had changed now. The knocking no longer brought terror, it brought anticipation, a rhythm she had come to recognize, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls of her apartment. Each knock carried meaning, each pause a question she was meant to answer. But despite the familiarity, there was still a gnawing uncertainty, a shadow of doubt that made her second-guess everything. She had pieced together fragments of the past to photograph, the letters, the music box, but one question remained. Who was behind all of this? Who had been orchestrating this careful, painstaking sequence of events, night after night, decade after decade? And then, one evening, the answer revealed itself in the most unexpected way. She returned home later than usual, the city lights flickering through the rain-soaked streets. And there it was, the knocking, slower, deliberate, almost urgent. She approached the door cautiously, heart hammering, and when she opened it, she saw someone standing there, framed by the dim hallway light. For a moment, her mind refused to comprehend. The face was familiar, and yet it carried the weight of years, the quiet intensity of a secret kept too long. It was not a stranger, not a ghost, but someone she had loved, someone she had forgotten, and yet never truly lost. Her knees nearly gave out as recognition flooded her senses. This was the person who had been leaving the clues, the letters, the objects that had once been hers. This was the figure behind the knocking, the one who had been waiting patiently, night after night, for her to notice, to remember, to return. Tears welled in her eyes as emotions she hadn't felt in years, relief, love, regret, hope, collided in a storm inside her. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she heard it, her name. The sound was soft, familiar, intimate, and it carried a lifetime of unspoken apologies and long-awaited confessions. They stepped closer, and for the first time, she realized the depth of what had been done for her, the patience, the careful planning, the determination to reach her despite the years, the distance, the silence. Every knock had been a call, every note a bridge, every forgotten object a message waiting to be understood. And as they finally stood face to face, the weight of the past lifted slightly, replaced by understanding. She could see it in their eyes, the longing, the regret, the hope that she would finally see, finally understand, and finally forgive. The revelation was almost too much to bear. She remembered the laughter of childhood afternoons, the whispered promises in hallways now covered in shadows, the warmth of hands she hadn't held in decades. The knocking had been a countdown, a warning, a plea, and now it had reached its conclusion. She had discovered who it was, and with that discovery came both the resolution and the realization. Fear had been transformed into connection, suspense into understanding, and loneliness into reunion. Every sleepless night, every tremor of anticipation, every moment of doubt had led to this single, breathtaking truth. She was not alone. She had never truly been alone. And as the rain fell softly outside, washing the city in muted light, she finally allowed herself to breathe, to smile, to step forward and close the gap that years of silence had created. The knocking had stopped, but its message remained clear and undeniable. Some mysteries, no matter how terrifying at first, are meant to guide us, to awaken us, and to reconnect us with the people and the truths that shape our lives. In that moment, she understood it fully, and she knew that her nights of fear had been nothing compared to the nights of hope, of reunion, and of love that had been waiting patiently, knocking, all along. In the days that followed, the apartment no longer felt like a place of fear. The shadows that had once crept along the walls now seemed almost protective, watching over her as if they, too, were part of the story being carefully revealed. She spent hours sifting through the letters, the photographs, the little objects that had been left for her, piecing together memories she hadn't realized she had lost. Each item told a story of love, of mistakes, of promises broken and kept, of a connection that time could never sever. She realized how much she had missed, how much she had forgotten, and how the knocking had been the only way to awaken her from the fog of years spent ignoring the past. Every conversation with the person who had been behind the knocking was a revelation. Words long withheld were now shared in hushed tones, words that explained absences, silence, and decisions that had haunted them both. And with each confession, each story, each tear shed, and each smile exchanged, the apartment transformed further from a place of dread to a sanctuary of rediscovery. She began to understand the depth of patience, of the silent devotion that had orchestrated every knock, every note, every object carefully placed in her path. This was more than a reunion. It was a deliberate act of love and hope, proving that some connections cannot be broken, no matter how long they are hidden in the shadows. Yet even in this relief, a new understanding dawned on her. Life is not always straightforward, and the truths that emerge often carry complexity. There were questions that could never be fully answered, moments lost to time that could never be reclaimed. But the knocking, the mysterious guide, had shown her that it was not the answers themselves that mattered most, but the journey to uncover them. The patience, the fear, the hope, and ultimately, the courage to face what had been buried. She realized that the knocking had been both a test and a gift, a way of leading her back to the parts of herself she had ignored, the people she had almost forgotten, and the memories that had waited quietly in the corners of her life, waiting for her to notice, to listen, and to return. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and painted the city in hues of gold and crimson, she walked to the door, now open not with fear but with expectation. No knock came this time. It was no longer necessary. She understood that the knocking had done its job, guiding her, awakening her, reconnecting her to a life she had long thought was gone. And as she stepped beyond the threshold, holding the hands of the one who had been waiting for her all these years, she felt a profound sense of closure, of relief, and of gratitude. The nights of terror, the sleepless hours, the trembling anticipation, all of it had led to this singular moment, a moment of clarity, of love, and of reunion. She realized then that some mysteries are not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us, to remind us of what we have lost, and to guide us back to what truly matters. The knocking had stopped, but the lessons remained, etched deep into her heart, a reminder that even in the loneliest, most frightening nights, there is always hope, always a path back, and always someone who has been reaching out, patiently, waiting for us to notice, to answer, to return. And in that realization, she finally understood what had been waiting for her all along. Not fear, not mystery, but the enduring, patient power of connection. The final night arrived quietly, almost unremarkably, yet the air felt charged with a tension she could no longer ignore. The knocking did not come as it had before, but she knew it was coming not as a sound, but as a presence, a culmination of every clue, every shadow, every sleepless night she had endured. She stood at the doorway, heart pounding, her mind a storm of anticipation and emotion, knowing that the truth she had chased for so long was finally within reach. And then, in the softest rhythm, she felt it not through sound, but through a profound awareness, a presence that had never left her side, quietly guiding her, patiently waiting for the moment she was ready to understand. As she stepped forward, she finally saw them fully. The figure who had haunted her nights with gentle knocks, the one who had been leaving letters, objects, and signs. There were no words at first, only a long, steady gaze that spoke volumes of love, regret, and longing. And in that silence, the puzzle pieces of her life, long scattered and hidden, fell into place. She realized the knocking had been a message, not of fear, but of love, a love that had transcended years, distance, and misunderstanding. Every knock had been a heartbeat, every note a whisper, every object a bridge spanning the gap of time. She reached out, trembling, and the moment their hands met, decades of separation, uncertainty, and longing melted away. Stories were shared, tears flowed, laughter returned to the spaces that had once been empty. She learned of sacrifices made, decisions misunderstood, and promises kept quietly, unseen, waiting for her to come back to them. The knocking had been more than a sound. It had been a path, carefully laid, a test of patience and courage, leading her not to fear, but to reconciliation, understanding, and finally, peace. And then she understood the knocking would never have stopped until she was ready, until she could face the past, accept the present, and embrace the connection she had feared was lost forever. The nights of terror, the relentless rhythm on her door, were never meant to frighten her. They were meant to awaken her, to teach her that some mysteries are patient, some truths are hidden, and some connections endure beyond the limits of time and memory. She had been guided, protected, and waited for every night in ways she had only begun to comprehend. As she stood there, hands clasped, hearts aligned, the apartment no longer felt like a cage, but like a home, a sanctuary of stories remembered, of love rediscovered, and of life reconnected. The knocking had ceased, its purpose fulfilled, leaving behind not silence, but understanding, not fear, but peace. She smiled, tears glistening, knowing that she was no longer alone, that the nights of waiting, wondering, and fearing had led her exactly where she needed to be, home, in the arms of someone who had never stopped reaching out, someone who had been patiently knocking all along, waiting for her to finally open the door. In that moment, every unanswered question, every mysterious night, every shadow that had once frightened her, became a testament to patience, love, and the quiet power of human connection. The knocking was over, but its message would live with her forever. That even in the darkest nights, when fear and uncertainty loom largest, there is always hope, always a path, and always someone waiting to bring us back to the truth, to love, and to ourselves. Weeks passed, and the apartment, once haunted by knocks in the dead of night, now hummed with quiet life and memories reclaimed. She had learned to sleep without fear, to move through the rooms with a sense of peace. Yet there remained a lingering awareness, a part of her that knew the story wasn't entirely over. The knocking had ceased, but its lesson resonated in her mind. Life is full of signals we often ignore, of whispers we fail to hear until we are ready to listen. She began to notice the subtleties, the creak of the floorboards, the wind through the windows, the small sounds of the night, and she realized the connection is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it comes slowly, patiently, like the knocking that had changed her life, and it waits for us to respond. She often revisited the photographs, the letters, the objects that had guided her back to the one she had nearly lost. Each piece held new meaning with every glance, revealing nuances she hadn't seen before, reminding her that the past and present are intertwined in ways we seldom understand. She found herself reflecting on the nights of fear, the trembling anticipation, and the relentless curiosity that had driven her to confront the unknown. Without those nights, she might never have uncovered the truth, might never have felt the depth of patience, love, and devotion that had reached across time just to reconnect with her. And then came a realization more profound than any she had experienced during the knocking itself. The experience had changed her. She was no longer simply the person who had been afraid of shadows or mysterious sounds. She was someone who had faced uncertainty, embraced the unknown, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the world around her. Every knock, every note, every carefully placed object had been more than a message from the past. It had been a lesson for the future. She understood now that life sometimes requires us to confront what we fear most, to follow the faintest of signals, and to trust that someone, somewhere, has been patiently waiting for us to return. Occasionally, she still heard faint sounds at night, a tap here, a whisper there, and though her first instinct would have been fear, now she smiled. She had learned the language of patience, of subtle connection, of hidden love. And in the quiet moments, alone in her apartment, she felt a deep, enduring gratitude for the knocks that had once terrified her, for the truth she had uncovered, and for the realization that even in the most mysterious and frightening nights, the world has a way of guiding us back to the people, the truths, and the connections that truly matter. Time moved forward, but the nights she once feared remained etched in her memory, not as terror, but as transformation. The knocking had stopped, yet it had changed her in ways she could not have anticipated. She began noticing small patterns in her life, the way subtle gestures carried hidden meaning, the way familiar spaces seemed to hum with past echoes, the way quiet patience could create connections stronger than any spoken words. It was as if the knocking had taught her a new language, a language of waiting, listening, and recognizing the unseen threads that link people together. She understood now that the mystery she had faced was never just about uncovering a secret. It was about learning how to be present, how to perceive, and how to embrace life with both courage and awareness. One evening, as she sorted through the photographs and letters that had once guided her, she came across an envelope she didn't recognize. Her hand trembled slightly, a familiar rush of anticipation coursing through her veins. She opened it to find a single note. The knocking never truly ends. It lives in those who listen. At first, she smiled softly, thinking it was a final echo of the one who had guided her. But as she read it again, she realized it was more than a message from someone else. It was a reflection of what she had become. She had learned to hear the subtle signals in life, to follow the rhythms that others might ignore, and to find connection where others saw only silence. From that day forward, she moved through life differently. The world was quieter, yes, but richer, filled with hidden messages, fleeting moments, and delicate threads of meaning she had once overlooked. She noticed the small kindnesses of strangers, the subtle glances of friends, and the quiet ways her own actions could reach someone else across time and distance. And sometimes late at night, she thought she heard the faintest tap on her door, a gentle reminder that life's mysteries never truly leave us. They evolve, they guide, and they continue to teach long after the initial fear has faded. The knocking had been the beginning of a journey, not the end, and she knew that its lessons would remain with her forever, a soft, enduring heartbeat in the quiet moments of her life. Months turned into years, and the apartment had long ceased to feel like a place of fear. Yet, she could never fully forget the nights of knocking, the faint rhythm that had once haunted her sleep and stirred her soul. She often reflected on how those nights had reshaped her, not through terror, but through revelation, patience, and unexpected love. Life felt more intricate now, full of hidden signals, quiet messages, and unspoken connections. She realized that the knocking had not only been about someone reaching out to her, but about teaching her to notice, to listen, and to trust the subtle signs that life quietly offers to those willing to pay attention. One evening, as she tidied the apartment, she noticed a small envelope tucked in the corner of a drawer, a place she had checked countless times before. Her heart skipped. She opened it, half expecting another note, another message. Inside, she found only a single phrase, written in the familiar handwriting she had come to recognize. "I am always here, even when you do not hear me." A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of awe. She realized the truth. The knocking would never truly end, not because it needed to, but because it was part of something larger, a reminder that life is filled with unseen connections, and that those who care for us, in ways both mysterious and patient, never fully leave us. In that moment, she smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace deeper than she had ever known. The knocking had guided her to understand love, patience, courage, and the enduring power of connection. It had taught her that the world often whispers its truths quietly, that the unseen often holds the most meaning, and that even in solitude, one is never truly alone. And as she sat by the window, watching the soft glow of the city at night, she felt a gentle tapping, not at her door this time, but at the edges of her heart, a subtle echo of all the nights she had once feared, a reminder that life, mystery, and love are all intertwined, patiently waiting for those who are ready to listen. Years had passed, and the nights of knocking had become a distant memory, yet she could still feel their echo in the quiet moments. Life had moved on, her days filled with work, friends, and the ordinary rhythm of the world, but there were times, always unexpected, when the memory returned like a soft, insistent pulse. A faint sound in the corner of her apartment, the creak of a floorboard in the empty hallway, a shadow that lingered a heartbeat too long, and in those moments, she would pause, remembering the nights that had changed her forever. The knocking had been more than a signal. It had been a teacher, a guide, a patient hand leading her back to herself and to the connections she had almost forgotten. One evening, she received a small package with no return address. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of anticipation and caution rising within her. Inside was a single key, old and worn, along with a note that read, "There are doors you will open, even when you do not hear the knocking. Remember who waits." She held it in her hands, heart racing, and realized that the story had never truly ended. The knocking had been a beginning, a call to awaken, but some mysteries are not meant to conclude. They are meant to evolve, to guide us in ways we cannot yet understand. She understood, in that moment, that the universe has a way of reaching into our lives, of sending signals patiently, persistently, until we are ready to see, to hear, and to act. And so, she kept the key close, a reminder that even in the ordinary, the hidden waits patiently. The knocking may have stopped at her door, but it would never stop at the edges of her life, her heart, or her mind. It had become part of her, a rhythm she carried silently, shaping her choices, her awareness, and the way she noticed the unseen threads that connect us all. She smiled softly, realizing that some stories are never truly over, They live on in the lessons they leave behind, in the subtle signs we learn to recognize, and in the quiet, enduring presence of those who wait for us patiently, even when the knocking fades into memory. Years had passed, and the nights of knocking had become a distant memory, yet she could still feel their echo in the quiet moments. Life had moved on, her days filled with work, friends, and the ordinary rhythm of the world. But there were times, always unexpected, when the memory returned like a soft, insistent pulse. A faint sound in the corner of her apartment, the creak of a floorboard in the empty hallway, a shadow that lingered a heartbeat too long, and in those moments she would pause, remembering the nights that had changed her forever. The knocking had been more than a signal. It had been a teacher, a guide, a patient hand leading her back to herself and to the connections she had almost forgotten. One evening, she received a small package with no return address. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of anticipation and caution rising within her. Inside was a single key, old and worn, along with a note that read, "There are doors you will open, even when you do not hear the knocking. Remember who waits." She held it in her hands, heart racing, and realized that the story had never truly ended. The knocking had been a beginning, a call to awaken, but some mysteries are not meant to conclude. They are meant to evolve, to guide us in ways we cannot yet understand. She understood, in that moment, that the universe has a way of reaching into our lives, of sending signals patiently, persistently, until we are ready to see, to hear, and to act. And so, she kept the key close, a reminder that even in the ordinary, the hidden waits patiently. The knocking may have stopped at her door, but it would never stop at the edges of her life, her heart, or her mind. It had become part of her, a rhythm she carried silently, shaping her choices, her awareness, and the way she noticed the unseen threads that connect us all. She smiled softly, realizing that some stories are never truly over. They live on in the lessons they leave behind, in the subtle signs we learn to recognize, and in the quiet, enduring presence of those who wait for us patiently, even when the knocking fades into memory. As she finally embraced the truth, the apartment fell silent, not with emptiness, but with a sense of peace that only comes when a mystery is solved and a connection is restored. The knocking had stopped, but its lesson remained. Patience, awareness, and the courage to face the unknown can uncover truths we never thought possible. And just when she thought the story was over, she realized something remarkable. The world around us is full of quiet signals, subtle messages, and hidden connections, waiting for those brave enough to notice. So the next time you hear a sound in the night, or feel a nudge you can't explain, remember, some mysteries are not here to frighten us. They are here to guide us. Or what might be knocking at your door tonight?